In 1928, a scientist looked into a messy laboratory dish and saw something strange. Around a patch of mold, the bacteria were gone. That moment would later be remembered as the discovery of penicillin, the first true antibiotic. But that is also where the myth begins. Because penicillin did not change the world in one day, it was not simply found and then handed to humanity like a miracle. It had to be noticed, it had to be believed, it had to be purified, it had to be tested, and above all, it had to be made in quantities large enough to save real human lives. This is not just the story of a lucky accident, it is the story of a discovery that was almost too early, too fragile, and too impractical to survive. And that may be what makes penicillin one of the greatest medical breakthroughs in history. The famous beginning took place at St. Mary's Hospital in London. Alexander Fleming, a Scottish bacteriologist, had been working with Staphylococcus. After returning to his lab, he noticed that one of his culture plates had been contaminated by mold. Normally, that would have meant one thing: throw it away. But Fleming saw something that most people would have missed. The mold was surrounded by a clear zone where the bacteria had not grown. Something in that mold was killing the bacteria. That was the real miracle of 1928. Not that mold landed where it should not have. That sort of accident could happen in many laboratories. The miracle was that Fleming looked carefully enough to understand that the contamination was not a failure, it was evidence. He named the substance penicillin after the penicillium mold that produced it. And yet, if you had visited the lab that year, you would not have seen the birth of modern antibiotics. You would have seen something much more uncertain, an interesting observation, a substance that was unstable and difficult to purify. Fleming had discovered penicillin in 1928, but for years it remained more like a scientific curiosity than a usable drug. That gap matters, because history often remembers the first person to notice something, but not always the people who make it real. The story only truly restarted years later at Oxford. There, Howard Florey, Ernst Chain, and Norman Heatley took Fleming's neglected discovery and asked a new question. Could penicillin actually work inside a living body? In 1940, their animal experiments showed that it could protect infected mice. That was a huge step forward, but it also revealed the next problem immediately. A mouse is small, a human being is not. So the Dunn School began to look less like an academic department and more like a desperate improvised factory. The researchers worked around the clock, extracting penicillin under wartime pressure. In February 1941, a police officer named Albert Alexander became the first patient to receive the Oxford team's penicillin. He was gravely ill, and within about a day, he showed dramatic improvement. But then the supply ran out. There simply was not enough penicillin. He relapsed and later died. Penicillin had not failed. Humanity's ability to produce it had failed. One of the most famous breakthroughs came in Peoria, Illinois. Lab assistant Mary Hunt found a moldy cantaloupe at a local market, and the strain on it yielded far more penicillin than the original. Then came the industrial breakthrough, deep tank fermentation. Companies such as Pfizer developed ways to grow microorganisms at huge scale, making penicillin available to Allied soldiers. The Nobel Prize was awarded in 1945 to Fleming, Florey, and Chain. But even in triumph, there was a warning. Fleming cautioned that bacteria could become resistant to penicillin if used improperly. Penicillin taught the modern world a lesson. Every medical miracle can be weakened if humanity becomes careless with it. What changed the world was the chain of people who refused to let the accident die.